And so I know that is on my mind, and it'll be the first thing I say, even before I say anything about me. That is on my mind. I'm tired. I am
Yeah.
tired of this, and that is just my most authentic self. And so I plan to address it straight out the gate as soon as it's my time to share anything. And with y'all by my side, we'll see where we go.
We're with you, man.
Let me tell you the audience. I'll tell you about the audience. I think we have about 40 people who from around the country, other Sigma Phis, maybe just, general public. People are sharing it with their few sons and daughters and families. We have, of course, Sigma Phi from Cornell alumni. We have some Cornell University staff. The message went out to the faculty from the chairman of the Africana Studies and Research Center, and we have quite a few there. The woman who heads up first generation low-income student services at Cornell is one of the people joining us. My guess is it's going to be a predominantly white crowd, but you'll be able to see it because we're doing Zoom. But with 80 people, it's going to be a lot. So you guys, you can set your gallery setting at the top just to cover speaker view, which I recommend from a concentration standpoint. We do have one alum from London and another from Colombia, South America. So I just don't know about the students from Sigma Phi or others, but we are recording, and I would expect quite a few people will be listening based on my skills as a marketer. I don't know. I do, as I said to Kwame, though, I think it is important and I think very valuable at some point, and hopefully earlier versus later, that you do share your backgrounds. What I found so striking, and this was just random, is really the three very, very different paths that led you each to Cornell, which is both, I think, a testament to Cornell and also obviously to your own backgrounds and perseverance. And I think it may give some context, even more context, I should say, to your remarks, but that's just my opinion. And since we have such a wide audience, I think it'll be helpful for people to know who you are and how you got here.
Definitely.
I'll start, with that question. I have a short introduction, but I think I'll leave it up to you to steal the agenda. And Kwame and Larry, I know in your emails, I don't expect this not to be an emotional evening for all of us. My hope is that this is the beginning of something and not just, a discrete evening in August. So just so you know, students have returned to campus and are returning. First day of classes is on the 2nd. Orientation week is virtual. There are some programs on racial justice. I'm hopeful that will have an impact in setting the tone for the year, but we'll see.
I just think it's interesting that all this is going on with the backdrop of the RNC, and you hear the messaging. Like, if you heard Doc Rivers' words about how they're talking about fear and stoking, like the suburban strategy, like the southern strategy, it's just playing itself all over again with how they're trying to win the election. It's just really interesting to see that being their main message point when it's really our communities that are being terrorized. And it's amazing juxtaposition, comparing the messaging and what's happening in reality versus what they're claiming.
Yep.
I thought it was surreal to listen to the First Lady last night, who has been an American citizen since 2006, talk about what she wants for our country and the history of our country. It was just ridiculous.
It really was.
And painful. That anybody could take that seriously. Woman didn't even come here till she was 26 years old. Very hard to take.
I was sharing with a colleague earlier today, we are processing just the constant onslaught of things, the sensory overload of
Yeah.
everything, like the RNC, what's happening, just all the things you all are talking about. And I was sharing how it's a little scary and somewhat disheartening to see on just in such with HD clarity the two fundamentally different Americas that that exist within one.
Yeah.
It's just I what they were describing. I couldn't watch much of it. Let me be very honest and not oversell. I watched about 4 minutes of it, and I just didn't have the spirit for it. But what I heard in that couple minutes, it's like I don't recognize that country they're describing. I don't. And yet, for the DNC, I was like, this is exactly the country I recognize. It's staggering. It's staggering.
Yeah, we don't live in the same country, that's for sure.
The scariest part for me is I saw like on Sean King's Instagram, how the police were talking to the armed vigilantes that ended up shooting the two protesters, the counter protesters that were protecting the gas station, that they were like getting served water from them. I don't know if this has been verified by news outlets, but I've seen it on Instagram, and eventually they caught the guy. But these guys one didn't have a gun license, and he's walking around the city, no issue, no check, he's able to shoot two people, flee the city, get all the way back to Illinois, and then he's arrested and then taken into custody, and he's alive. And to talk about two different Americas, to to have that lived experience as a white male walking around with the AK-40, I don't know what kind of, don't quote me on the gun he actually had, but it's insane. And then the craziest thing is how people still can deny it.
I know.
That's what gets me. It's I don't know.
I know.
We'll wait. I'm going to open up the. We've got 20 in the waiting room right now, and I'm going to open them up so we'll see them, and I'll give them 5 more minutes for other people to come on board. So, is that okay with you guys?
That's great. We're going to continue the conversation with them.
All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to be waiting a few minutes while other people join us tonight. We've got a good crowd who have RSVP'd. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll be with you shortly. Those Cornellians in the crowd, I just want to let you know that I was on campus yesterday delivering my sophomore daughter to her sorority. Place was a little eerie, beautiful as ever, but not very many people, as one expects. They're spreading the opening, the move-in over like 8 days. Most people were wearing masks or carrying masks. The COVID testing went incredibly smoothly, and it felt like Cornell. So hopefully students will behave. And as you may know, there is now a dashboard keeping track of COVID testing, and Cornell is reporting remarkably low numbers. So we're all optimistic. Classes start on September 2nd. So we'll start in just a few more minutes. People are still logging on, so just give them 1 or 2 more minutes. Thank you. All right, let's get started. We've got a little introduction, so there'll be a little chance for people to continue to log on. I want to welcome everybody. This is the third of a series of Sigma Phi alumni profiles that we're calling Common Bonds and Uncommon Lives. We began the series in June with 4 of our alumni and 1 rising senior who were playing key roles in the COVID crisis as physicians, investors, entrepreneurs, and nonprofit leaders. And we'll be continuing this series through the academic year as we find new ways to engage with the alumni and students and with our broader Cornell community. Just for logistics for tonight, we're using video conferencing so we can see people's faces. It makes it a little more interesting, a little more human and humane. The group is potentially quite large, so I apologize, but you can set your screen in the upper right-hand corner to focus on the speaker, which I recommend you do just to help you and all of us focus. Do put your screens and keep them on mute if you wouldn't mind. If you do want to ask a question, you're welcome to at any time. You can also send me the question via chat, and I will try and fit it in at an appropriate time. We are recording the session tonight. Several people wanted us to, and our panelists graciously agreed to do so. I want to thank lots of people who gave advice and counsel to me as a moderator tonight, and my job is really going to be limited because I think this conversation will take off pretty quickly. And I want to, of course, thank Ruben, Kwame, and Larry. The early conversations we've had have been really inspiring, and I'm so glad that we're having this opportunity tonight. So I'm aware of the pitfalls of being a moderator, so I'm just announcing so you know that the introduction is 450 words long, or approximately 3 minutes. So you don't have to listen to me too much longer. This evening, I want to welcome our audience, which includes students, parents, staff, faculty, and of course, alumni of Sigma Phi, both from Cornell and also from our other chapters. The genesis of this panel was this summer's racial unrest across the country and actually around the world. Personally, I felt challenged to take action, to show my support, and as the author of How to Be an Anarchist, Ibram X. Kendi said, stop being content with simply saying I'm not a racist. When I began to pull this evening together, Ruben Monday of class of 69, one of our distinguished panelists, wrote me the following, which I'm paraphrasing, and I hope he's okay with me doing so. Since the time of Frederick Douglass, Black folks have been explaining to a larger community what it's like to be Black in America. I think that the relevant question now is how will the white community and other communities of privilege respond to what they are being shown in actual pictures and video of racist police brutality, like the killing of George Floyd, and I'm adding, painfully, once again, last week's police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Ruben continues, brutality against the African-American community has been going on since we were brought here as slaves, but the presence of video cameras is making some of that brutality undeniable. Frederick Douglass was a firm believer in the equality of all peoples, be they white, Black, female, Native American, or Chinese immigrants. He was also a believer in dialogue and in making alliances across racial and ideological divides, as well as in the liberal values of the United States Constitution. And when radical abolitionists criticized his willingness to engage in dialogue with slave owners, Douglass replied, I will unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong. Thank you, Ruben, for those thoughts and profound words. And I thank you, Kwame and Larry, for your enthusiastic participation tonight. In the most simplest terms tonight, I hope we can explore a few fundamental questions. These were thought of prior to, of course, Jacob Blake in Kenosha. As members of the white and other privileged populations, what do we need to know? How do we understand the issues and conditions and perspectives of being Black in America? Next question is, what can we do to repair our world, to make a difference in truly moving toward a more equal and just society? And possibly, how can we create at Cornell University an institution that's welcoming, diverse, inclusive, and just? So there's a lot to unpack in the following 4 hours we have tonight. 60 minutes. So let's get started by asking each of our alumni to introduce themselves by talking a little bit about their youth leading up to their arrival at Cornell and at Sigma Phi. Ruben, if we can begin with you.
Okay, I think I have to mention, first of all, it's great to be here with you, but I do have to mention it's particularly difficult to have this event, knowing what's going on in Wisconsin, and it does weigh on our spirits, and I hope we can be at our best, but you should know that it's a very, very painful time, particularly painful. Anyway, my name is Reuben Monday. I'm originally from Tuskegee Institute, Alabama. There are two Tuskegees. One was Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, which is where I'm from, which was all Black, and a Tuskegee, Alabama, right next to it, which was all white. And I grew up in legal segregation and illegal segregation. I went to Chambliss Children's House on the campus of Tuskegee Institute, where my parents taught. All of my classmates were Black. I did not know any white people. I had one Chinese teacher. All my other teachers were Black at Chambliss Children's House. My parents were educators, as I mentioned. My father was PhD. My mother was an English instructor. At 14, like many middle-class Black kids, including Kathleen Neal, who became Kathleen Cleaver, and Julian Bond, who was involved in the founding of SNCC, sent away to a boarding school in Pennsylvania, which was all white. So most of my experience has been either in all Black situations or almost all Black, almost all white. So there were two Black students in our class at Wyoming Seminary in Kingston, Pennsylvania. Both of us were from Tuskegee. So I spent 4 years there in Cornell in the fall of 1965. And my father and I took the train from Tuskegee to Binghamton and the bus from Binghamton to Ithaca. I think I'm going to talk later about how Cornell was at the time, Dan, but that gives you some idea of my background up to the time I got to Cornell.
Thank you, Reuben. Kwame, can I turn to you?
Yes, please. Hi, everyone. As Reuben shared, I have to start by saying my spirit is heavy coming into this call today. Not 30 minutes ago, I turned to my wife. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not sure I'm gonna join this call. She encouraged me I should, and she was right, which is often the case, though I rarely like to admit it. My journey coming to Cornell, I think honestly starts before me, which I think makes what happened in Wisconsin and every city and town across our country all the time much more difficult to stomach. I was born in Trinidad, and my dad met my mom in college in Buffalo. And my dad, during his time in this country, was very involved in the civil rights movement. Reuben mentioned SNCC. He was involved in SNCC. Some of you all may have heard of Stokely Carmichael, or his later name, Kwame Ture. He's from Trinidad, a major civil rights leader and activist. And he and my dad engaged together. And so my dad came to this country and was just very focused on contributing to civil rights during his time here, and then went back home and was in government. And keep in mind, Trinidad got its independence from Britain, 6 years ago? So most of his upbringing was under British colonization. And so that's the blood that courses through my veins. My parents got divorced when I was 5, and I moved to Buffalo with my mom. That is a hell of a transition, Trinidad to Buffalo, but nonetheless. And I grew up with a single mom. I got free priced lunch every day of kindergarten through 12th grade. We didn't have much money. At times we needed government assistance. At times my mom ate a bit less so that we could have our fill. And I don't know if I felt poor. I knew we didn't have money, but I don't know if I felt poor. But poverty is hell, any way you slice it. And by the grace of God and by the unshakable commitment of my mom, I had some okay schooling, some bad schools, but she just didn't stop till she got me into City Honors, which is a school for the gifted and talented in Buffalo, and a number of things come from City Honors. And that school changed everything for me. I started taking AP and IB courses. I started dreaming different dreams of what was possible for me. And I'll never forget, junior year, there was this girl that I really liked, and she was going on a school visit to Cornell, a minority hosting weekend. I don't like the term minority, but that's what it was called. And I said I had to go. I just had to go and see. And I went, I randomly checked human ecology box on the little placard that you use to register. And my mom drove me up there, and I remember driving onto campus and seeing castles all over the place and being like, I didn't know places like this existed. And this sure as hell can't be a place that I could go. And slowly but surely met incredible people, stayed there for the weekend. My mom fell in love with the campus. The folks in the human ecology admissions office were just so incredible. And we drove away that day being like, could you imagine? Could you imagine if I got in there? And I remember that. And I also remember my mom getting really quiet later, knowing that the height of her dream for me of going there was only eclipsed by the height of her fear for not being able to pay for it and my not being able to attend. We got home, I applied, fast forward, got accepted. Remember the day I got accepted, I told her, and the look on her face was that same true elation that I think only a mom can ever really feel or show, especially a single mom that's put it all on the field to make it possible. And terror that we wouldn't be able to afford it. But I got a good amount of financial aid and loans and had to work and all that. And I went, and we packed up our van with my sisters in tow and drove me up to Cornell to attend a pre-freshman summer program. My acceptance to Cornell was conditional. I had to complete a pre-freshman summer program because Cornell wasn't quite sure I was ready, Cornell material, which hurt my pride, but nonetheless, when I look back on it, I wasn't ready. And had I not had that experience that summer before with a lot of Black and brown kids, mostly from New York City, and found our way in what was a very predominantly white institution and made connections to professors and advisors that helped us to deal with what it felt to be so othered in that community, I'm certain I wouldn't have graduated, especially when my mom fell ill in 1999 and passed away from cancer. And so I will pause there and pass it over to Larry.
Thank you, everyone. Humbled to be on this panel, and I'll let everyone know I'm not as eloquent as my two fellow panelists. So hopefully I can do justice. Today is, as Kwame and Ruben have mentioned, a very difficult day. We'll try to hold it together throughout the course of the program. But my background, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Share a connection with Dan in that regard. More specifically, Beechwood, Ohio. It's interesting hearing about Kwame and Ruben's background because I grew up in a predominantly white, predominantly Jewish. I think my neighborhood until high school, the school district was, I think, 95% Jewish. But I want to kind of start talking about my parents in terms of my journey, because I think a lot of my friends, I don't talk about this with them openly, is just how close like racism is to our parents. Like growing up with a father that grew up in Georgia, saw like a third cousin actually lynched, carrying that trauma with him. And I think a lot of my friends don't realize this is in the lifetime of our parents. Like this isn't these aren't things that happened generations ago. This is, and then I bring this up because this is the fear that in regards to what happened with Jacob Blake this week, these are the conversations that our parents are having with us from the age of like 2. And I'm like, Dad, stop talking about it. I don't care. Like as you're growing up, you like disregard, like especially me growing up in this like little bubble of Beechwood, Ohio, not fully understanding when I leave the door every day, that they're actually terrified that a cop isn't going to realize that I'm actually part of this community and assume I'm just another Black kid walking around. So even though I grew up in a predominantly Jewish high school, I didn't have many like overt racist things happen to me. Just growing up with the fear of the Black parents that come from these tormented environments and them raising me with that fear. When you hear about the talk, I got the talk a lot. And I think more than a lot of even my Black friends from my dad, because he had those experiences in the Deep South growing up. And that's actually why his family actually migrated to Cleveland, Ohio. So they call it a migration, but honestly, a lot of these people got up and left the South because they were terrified and they had businesses, had homes, but just needed to flee. It's really, you can even consider like refugees leaving a tormented region. So I just bring that up because I don't share that with a lot of my friends. I think it has played into my upbringing and even this paranoia going into all white environments at times. But more about me. So grew up in Beechwood. Even through my experiences, I think of small microaggressions of racism. Like I was put in my mother was a school teacher. I was put in remedial reading, even though I could read in the first grade. My mom had to go fight tooth and nail to get me into the normal reading class. I would love to go back to that teacher and show her like all of my accomplishments today, having been put in that class. I was thrown out of a classroom in 7th grade by a teacher for raising my hand once. And my dad, all these are like microaggressions, even though I grew up in this, I didn't even realize it, I think at that time, at that age and those incidents, but even I would consider myself fortunate. There are many instances that happened through my upbringing that now in hindsight, I know were due to racism. Going into high school, I gravitated towards math and science. That was my strong suit. Had a strong passion for soccer. Actually found out about Cornell because the soccer team was really bad. And I was like, oh, I can definitely walk onto that team. So that's actually how I initially got interested in Cornell. I was recruited to a few D1 schools, but then applied to Cornell. I wasn't recruited there and got in. And they invited me to their the freshman weekend. Had a similar experience to Kwame, where I was just looked like Harry Potter, just walk around the campus. Went to my first ever fraternity party. Just it was really cool experience. Shared the room with a really great guy by the name of Neil, who went on to be my freshman year roommate. I was in his wedding, so had a really enchanted first experience with Cornell, and ended up going and studying mechanical engineering there. And similar to Kwame, I was from a lower middle class family, or maybe my mom was a special education teacher in the inner city of Cleveland. My dad was a railroad conductor, so definitely couldn't afford Cornell, but was very fortunate to gain a number of scholarships. Like the Cornell traditions was huge, and the Jacob Irwin Scholarship and allowing me to come to Cornell. So always fortunate that those programs do exist at Cornell to give students like myself an opportunity to actually go and fulfill their dream. And similar to Kwame, did the pre-freshman summer program, was equally offended because I thought I had high marks in school. I was like, why do I have to go if everyone else doesn't go? But it was an amazing experience. Some of my friends that I hang out with today and consider close friends, I met during that program. And I think creating those bonds and knowing other individuals that look like you at the school before the school year starts, I think it would have been a different experience walking into Donlin, not really knowing anyone. Although I'm used to navigating white spaces, I think it just would have been, wow, I'll get 4 more years of this. So I think it was great to have that connective tissue going into freshman year. So it's kind of how I walked into Cornell.
Thanks, guys. And it helps for us to get this background. Larry, I want to come back to you. I mean, you talk about not sharing and you know, having a history of very powerful and very painful stories to tell. Isn't there an advantage for you to share those with people you care about and people who care? Because I think for many of us, the Black experience seems remote. It still seems distant. It's on TV. And without realizing it, the Black experience is right next to us.
But I think obviously I think it's great to share, but growing up, you hear the things, you become conditioned by this system, right? Where you'll mention, like, a friend will make a comment that's out of line, like, oh, you talk so white, or oh, you do XYZ, or oh, you're an Oreo. Oh, all of these microaggressions happen where, you know, they don't want to hear that experience. They like, why are you so sensitive? Well, like, oh, that's not racist. Like, that was just a joke. And you hear that throughout your entire life, your whole life at Cornell, even today. People are finally woke today, and they're starting to realize these microaggressions. They consider themselves woke for a media cycle, and then they go back to posting their puppy pictures on Instagram instead of the Black Lives Matter stuff. But throughout your entire life, you're conditioned by the system, and people don't even know they're doing it to you. That's why when you think about racism, people usually think about racism as being bad people and good people. Bad people are racist, good people are not. But even Black people can be prejudiced and racist towards other Black people because of conditioning. Me growing up in a more affluent neighborhood, I have certain misconceptions about people sometimes, and I have to check myself. I can realize that because I'm a Black person and can acknowledge, oh, I might be thinking out of line. So I mentioned that because throughout your entire life as a Black man, woman, you're conditioned to interact with white people in a certain way. And until you have the mental maturity as an adult to realize this is even going on, like as a 13-year-old kid, you're not going to be able to navigate this space and explain all these different things going on. You're just a child yourself. And I'm even learning more about all of this stuff today as a 29-year-old man and how to best have it. And I just turned 29. So it's easy to say that, oh, you should just share how you're feeling, but your entire life you've been beat down to say that you are wrong for feeling these type of things. So that's, I think, why Black people don't, because throughout your life you're taught no one wants to have these conversations. They want you to suffer in silence. And I know most of my Black friends have felt like that. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
No, that's fine.
Can I build on that? Can I build on that, Dan?
Sure, of course.
I mean, this, why not share is because it's exhausting, right? Like, it is absolutely exhausting to be dealing with and talking about and seeing another example of a Black body brutalized in HD clarity. And that's one stake, right? A man being shot in the back while his 3 kids are in the car, right? And then to turn around and have to share why something was said was not appropriate, or why it was in fact racist, or convince people that racism is a thing, that institutional racism exists, that as a Black man, I have to work 2, 4, 10 times as hard to be seen and to achieve the same sets of things. And you just get tired. And as you get tired, you get more angry. And as you get more angry and show anger, then you become the scary black man and you get caricaturized. And so then you have to temper that and turn that all inwards. And turning emotion inwards creates mental health gaps, creates depression, anxiety. It's forms of PTSD. And so I think it is, I do believe we all have to come together to figure this out together, right? Like I do believe there has to be real discourse. We have to openly and with real empathy and real care and love, like really listen and hear each other. But that's just to take that risk when you are an adolescent, right? Like when you're coming to Cornell, that's ripe. I studied human development at Cornell. Like that's adolescent development. You're figuring out who you are. You're figuring out your identity. You're coming to grips with feeling othered, being in a campus that others you, feeling not safe, not sure if you will be judged by the merits of what you're capable of. And at the same time, if you're going to be real about it, and I usually don't talk about this in mixed groups, you're also confronting your own internalized racism and oppression. You're also grappling with stories you're telling yourself about yourself because you are a Black man. And that's exhausting. And so that is when I said earlier I wasn't sure I was going to come on this call today. The realest reason was because I was like, I'm tired. And I don't know if I have the energy to create a space for others when I'm still trying to figure out how I'm doing in all of this.
Thank you. Ruben, can you add?
Well, I think we can talk about the Black experience, but I think James Baldwin talks about the innocence of white people. I'm not at all clear on why we need to explain what it's like being Black in America when if you live in an all-white community, if you work in an all-white job, it's just hard for Black people to believe that that was never discussed. But I guess if your experience is white enough that anything that involves anybody who's not white, that's the unusual situation. Maybe it doesn't get discussed, but usually a conversation about race, it's a two-way street. Somebody put up the white and colored signs. You know, when I was growing up, someone was responsible for there being a white school and a Black school.
Yeah, he did.
So somebody talked about that. So we need to have a conversation about why that is from a white perspective, and not just in terms of a reactive perspective. Like a comment might get made, Ruben, you think about race a lot. Well, my life depended on me thinking about race, because if I drank out of a water fountain, you know, I might get beat up. So we, as Black Americans, we don't live in a white America. We have to think about race. It's a burden. We need to talk about it and share it with each other. We need to have our white brothers and sisters talk about the things we know they know. We know that white relatives and friends voice their views on racial issues in one way when Black people are not around, and another way when Black people are around. Share some of that. So yeah, it's difficult all the way around, particularly when we have a large segment of people. Nikki Haley stood up at the Republican convention and said America wasn't a racist country. Well, for people who were enslaved for 250 years and segregated for another 50, and she's an immigrant, that's crazy. Now, we all hope to get past some of this, but we all know what it is. We all know, we don't know exactly what the fear is that some people have of Black people, but it's clearly a terrible, terrible fear. And I think it would be helpful to the Black community to understand, what is that fear? Is it just people having pigmentation? Is it a knowledge that we've had a very rough, tough experience, that a large group of us have been denied educational opportunities, so many of us don't speak the way? When I went away to boarding school, there were little cues you had to learn in terms of custom and culture, like only wearing khaki pants and navy jackets. We wore a coat, and show you how old I am, we had to wear coats and ties to class. Well, in the South, where it's hot, we wore loud pastel colors. And so you pick up these cues of what's acceptable and what's not. And these things pass for what's sophisticated and what's smart, when really they're custom. And it's very difficult to learn custom when you're coming from a segregated environment, particularly a segregated environment where education has been denied. So I hope that wasn't too tough an answer, but there's an innocence that James Baldwin talks about that many in the white community like to, I would have to say, hide behind. It's impossible not to know some of the racial things that go on, some of the racial things that get said. It's not necessary for Black people to explain. Your relatives say things about their racial prejudice to you. I don't blame you for loving your relatives, but don't act like you don't know about their views. But I have to live with them. But yeah, we're having this panel with African American on race. We need to have a panel of white alumni on race, so they can talk about their experiences. And I think Larry and Kwame and I can learn from that. Now we know a lot more about you than you do about us, because you have a lot more resources as a group than we do. The elite institutions are overwhelmingly white. So to really get access to the keys to the culture, we don't have the luxury, really, of not learning your culture. You, on the other hand, if you choose not to, are free to not be bothered with it. And I would say some in your community work at not being bothered with inclusion and expect us to fix the problem in many cases. So the answer is getting long, but the one consistent thing in the racial situation in the United States is that we don't talk about it across racial lines. We don't talk about it honestly. And it's well past time, because I think we're at a point where we're really deciding whether African Americans can be American citizens or not. You can't talk about law and order when you're watching people being shot in the back. You can't expect law and order. You can't talk about constitutional prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. You know, when you're shooting people over traffic tickets and kneeling on people's necks, you can't talk about due process of the law. When was the trial? Where was the jury? So the Constitution doesn't make any sense if a guy can just kill me and I don't even really understand why he wasn't prosecuted. And the guy who's deciding whether he's prosecuted or not is the same guy he works with every day, prosecuting other people, many of whom look like me. And nobody can seem to figure out that's a conflict of interest. It took Keith Ellison, who's from Detroit, who had to go into Minneapolis to get the kneeling officer prosecuted. So yeah, we need to have these conversations, but we need to hear from you. You don't need to hear from us. All you need to know from us is, how would you feel if you had to worry about your kids being shot over traffic tickets?
I think there's a fallacy too around people not knowing. Like Emmett Till, that the reason that got so much attention, it was put in plain public. Rodney King video was put out there. Individuals saw it. Now we have social media. So these things have been broadcast. I have so many friends that have, so like now that I know, now that like social media is out there, like these things have been documented and talked about for years. So this excuse of people now saying like, now I realize these things are going on, I think that's a self-serving line that makes them sleep better at night. And people have known this is going on. Like, you don't need us to tell you these things are happening. I'm going to call bullshit on that, to put it frankly.
Yeah, and I would say I really agree. I'm vibing with what you're both saying. And Ruben, I go back to your question was a powerful one. Like, what are we afraid of, right? Like, the concept of anti-Blackness, it's not a concept, it's real life. It's what is leading to all of this, is centuries old, right? Like this has been, it's the root of all of this, honestly. And I think there's stages of this conversation. I fear we get arrested at one stage of it, right? And so the first stage is like realization, and it's almost individualized, right? I imagine people on this call are observing this conversation, taking this as a conversation through the prism of their experience. Like that's what we do as humans. And that's important. And I'm sure people are hearing things that make them feel all kind of ways. In fact, I'm seeing it on faces. I'm getting private chats about how certain things are really resonating deeply and appreciating the things we're saying. I'm sure there are some things that are being said that are making folks uncomfortable. And so I think that is a phase of the conversation, and it's important, but I think we get stuck there. And that prevents us from changing stuff, right? Because at its core, unless we all lock arms and say institutional and systematic racism was purposely constructed, this country was built with this key ingredient, and enabled a ton of the power and the prosperity and the economy to take hold in the way it did. And it built on itself and concentrated power and created self-sustaining mechanisms for hundreds of years, that none of this is by mistake, right? Like this is, and for us to examine this, right, and move from the individual and more think about like the system and reflect on how are we contributing to that system? How are we furthering a set of systems that create this inequity, and what would it mean to get in the way? Or as like Congressman John Lewis said, get in good trouble. That is the piece that I think we got to get to. And real talk, that is hard to get to, because when you have been privileged, you have to confront as a part of your identity that stories you've told yourself about your accomplishment and what you did are influenced by you having a head start in really concrete ways that others did not. And it challenges your identity. It challenges the construct of who you are, the life you've built, etc. And that is hard. That is, I mean, as much as I hate racism, we have to treat racism and systematic racism as the enemy, not each other. Like, we do not succeed. Like, we all have been hurt, harmed, dehumanized by racism, all of us, everyone on this call, white, black, brown, everyone. And I fear we don't get to that part of the conversation, which is, how do the systems at Cornell or whatever school you attended, how were they constructed? How do they continue? How are they today that make it so that it is this way for us? I mean, Amadou Diallo died in 1999. I was at Cornell then, right? Shot 41 times. How is that all that different than what happened in Wisconsin? What, 21 years later?
You don't have a video of it, that's the difference. It can't be denied because we can see it now. But what can be distressing when we're looking for hope in this situation is that for whatever reason, people physically do not look the same, but we're all, I would hope we can all accept it, we're all human beings. Most of us are not white or black. Most of us look Asian for all the angst about black and white in the United States. Do we have a real good solution to get over problems with our differences? Hopefully we won't get back to genocide, which a lot of this police shooting looks a lot like genocide. And we have people like Dylan Roof in South Carolina wanting to start a race war. How does that end? Does that end with nothing but white people? How realistic is that? And who would those people be? I mean, we really need to solve this problem. And certainly, and I hate to be legalistic, but you know my background. The main thing that gives us hope is for us to try to take the words of the Declaration of Independence and the words of the Constitution seriously, and the application of the Constitution in particular. And to the extent that those go out the window, the country's really in trouble because there's nothing to hold it together. Now, I'm old enough to remember the Ozzie and Harriet sitcoms, Father Knows Best, back when TV pretended that only white people existed. And I think that may be part of the hidden meaning of making America great again. But America wasn't white then. The world wasn't white then. It was just that only white people were being shown. That situation has become pretty much impossible. So now we're dealing with the shock of the fact that people don't all look like me. People don't all act like I do. People don't all have my culture, even other Americans. As I describe my background, nobody white had that experience. PhD father going to a colored waiting room, riding around with your father asking, do you know a hotel where my family can sleep? A PhD. So it is really time, if we're going to come to grips with this situation. I think the fatigue that we feel, Kwame, is that I think we're at the end of our rope.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any more I have a dream speeches, and we shall overcome starts to sounding kind of pathetic when you're asked to tolerate murder on video with people telling the guy, murdering the guy, he's saying he can't breathe, get off of him, and this guy being so sure he won't be prosecuted that he just stays there.
If you think about the concept of like what makes us human and as a society that keeps us stable, it's social contracts, and the social contract between the Black community and the government has been broken time and time again. So people look at these protests and sit from their suburban homes and like, how, like, this is insanity, this is anarchy. How are these people burning down their communities? They're burning down, they could know these people. It's the social contract has just been violated so many times that these people have reached the point of desperation. Like violence is the language of the broken. So I think it's really easy to sit back and like, this isn't getting us anywhere, but I think there is a bit of hopelessness, especially when you have figureheads in the government that aren't acknowledging the pure existence of these issues. So I don't know how, without calling it and naming it, and Kwame, to your point, getting beyond the acceptance of that it exists and then starting to heal. Without doing that, I don't see a path forward, especially if a certain, not to get political, a specific party wins again, and you see the same type of law and order rhetoric that comes out. Like, I don't see a path forward, especially when you have the NYPD endorse, like for the first time ever, endorsing a candidate when you have protests that multiple times during those protests, the NYPD continued to exhibit police brutality. So I just don't see what, like, if you have if this isn't stopped, if you don't actually name it, I don't think there is a path forward, to be honest. And I think this is all happening, mind you, during a pandemic. Like, we haven't even talked about that yet. Like, we are at a pandemic that disproportionately is impacting Black and Latino families. So people want to talk about why they're out of jobs, they're watching on social media, on loop, murder porn. There's a sense of hopelessness that's entered these communities, our community, that I even I'm at work and I log on Instagram, I get off a work call, pick up my phone, oh, there's a Black person getting killed, go back on. Like, what does that do to your psyche? Like, even like, I'm not in those communities. I'm lucky enough to be, like, right now I'm in the suburbs of Boston at my girlfriend's parents' place. But I'm walking around with a smile on my face, even though I'm just like, have a low grade depression run the entire time. So I can't imagine how the people in those situations that wake up every day in those broken communities wake up and go to their jobs, go to the front line, go to the grocery store where they know they're at higher risk of catching COVID, deal with people, then go home, turn on the TV, another Black man killed. I just truly don't understand. And then have a government that can't even say there's a problem. I just don't know where there's a path forward with the current lead. I'm going to get political. I don't see how there is a path forward, to be honest.
Yeah, I just feel both of y'all so much. I have this vacillation between hopelessness and extreme hopefulness, um, which can make me feel a bit crazy at times, to be honest, because everything you described about the hopelessness, I'm there with you. I feel in waves at different points in the day, week, month, year, decades. And yet there is, I don't know if this call would have got this number of people on it engaging 20 years ago in this way. I don't know if it would have. I there my something has changed. Something fundamentally has broken in this country over the past period of time. And this type of conversation, the three of us talking as openly and authentically as we are, with, in many cases, I know maybe not everyone on here is a brother of Sigma Phi, but with our brothers listening, hearing, extending empathy, taking it all in, that there's an opportunity in that. There's something in that. And I do not believe our future on race and race relations in this country has been decided. I don't think it's been solidified. I don't think it's been chiseled in stone. I think we each have a very powerful say in that. I think we're seeing the powerful say that this generation, this next generation, is having in that as we watch them take to the streets. But I think we have I think we can choose to do different, choose to be different. And the first step, if you haven't been in the game on this for a period of time, it can feel daunting and overwhelming, and you could be like, God damn, this is hopeless. I don't know what else to do with this. But I think there are little steps and little pebbles we can start to throw into the pond. And the more we throw them, the more those waves band together, and they will become that riptide that brings us down. And I think the question just becomes, will we take those steps? Will we do those things? And to me, this is all about equity, right? Leveling the playing field, right? And to take it back to my time at Cornell, when I was in Sigma Phi at Cornell, I knew so very little of how the world works. I didn't understand finance or money. Where I grew up, none of us had any, and we are terrified as hell of it. And honestly, to make sense and to like not just feel bad about yourself or your circumstance, you almost had to like demonize those with money, right? Like you almost had to see them as they had to have done something untoward to achieve that. Because I'm a good person. I know all the good people around me. We don't have anything. Like so something's got to be different. Like that's just how you make sense of it when you don't have the faculties to do anything different. And so my time in Sigma Phi, I was around a lot of my peers when their parents came, when our alumni came back, very wealthy, powerful people that opened my eyes to stuff I otherwise would not have. Right? In no way, no how I don't think I would have had the career I've had since, had I not been exposed to that and had some of these notions challenged. And at the same time, I look back on when alumni came back to the house and spent time, Oliphant series, whatever it was, those were some of the times I felt most othered as a brother of Sigma Phi.
Why?
I didn't feel seen. I was the outlier. I was the there weren't many Black folks in the house. There were a couple by the time I was further on in my career at Cornell, but colorism is real. I was the darkest of all the Black people in the house. And I didn't feel that there was the same interest taken in me as I saw my white fraternity brothers. My fraternity brothers that had grown up with parents that had done various things, knew the language, had the networks, etc. And so a concrete thing any of us could choose to do coming out of this call is think about who are those that have identity markers that have historically and generationally been marginalized and oppressed and may not have access to the types of opportunities, networks, insights to compete on a level playing field, and get in the way. Do something about it. When COVID finally gets the hell under control and moves out of the way, we're back in the house, like, go and see, like, tell me your story. How are you doing? How can I help you? And strike up that type of relationship and conversation, because it gets to what Ruben, I feel like, was saying a bit ago, is like, we have to find the humanity in each other and anchor on that and support each other in that. Because I'm certain anyone that came to Cornell when I was a student there and heard any of my story the way you've heard it tonight, I am certain it would have influenced the type of relationship I had with them, they with me, and likely would have influenced lots of small or big decisions we've made since then that would have moved the world either closer or further from this ideal that I think we're all wanting to see.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think we have to remember, as tough as it is, we're the lucky ones, Kwame. We're Cornell grads. We know the cues.
Amen.
We've had access to the culture that's in control of the resources.
That's right.
So I think even though it can be despairing and it can cause despair, I know that given where I am in life, it's my responsibility to be encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the reasons I live in Detroit. One of the reasons I chose to stay in Detroit, because for all the challenges and all the training, I wanted to use it where it was needed, and not just to distance myself, to run away, but to try to be helpful. I'm grateful for the time I spent some time at the Africana Studies Center, and I realized, and this was before you guys' time, that there were no courses from African American perspective on campus. So we didn't have, there were very few faculty members. We didn't have people at Cornell who were living our life or worse. So I draw on what I know about the life of Frederick Douglass. I draw on what I know about the life of Harriet Tubman. I'm not about to forget any of that, because I know how much better I have it than they did. And I mean, these are superhuman beings. When you think about a human being escaping slavery and going back time and time again to save other people, that's a superhuman. When you talk about a person who's where education is illegal, educating himself to the point where he's debating internationally and using Christian concepts to affect the consciences of people who are enslaved, walked off slave plantation. So I remember, thanks to some of my training and other places there on campus, that's part of who we are too.
Mm-hmm.
And my expectations of Sigma Phi were different. There were no African-American fraternities on campus when I was there. There were very few African-Americans. There were 38 in my class, and that might have been the largest ever. And after freshman year, you had to have a place to live, and an apartment had its issues for African-American students at that time as much as a White House had for African-American students. But my resident advisor in my freshman dorm was a guy named Peter Martin, who was a Sigma Phi. And I was in University Halls number 4, which was almost next door to Sigma Phi. And those guys were good. I had no idea there was this big controversy about me getting rushed, or they never told me any of that. And that kind of goes back to my point about there being a two-way conversation. Everybody in the house knew that my presence was controversial, but me. So I only found that out. I'm sitting in my office in downtown Detroit. The guy was writing a book about Sigma Phi, asking me, how do I feel about being the first black in the Epsilon chapter? I said, well, look, I'm a guy who grew up with white and colored signs. I wasn't running around Cornell taking a survey of how everybody felt. If there was no whites only sign, Ruben Mundy was going in there to do the best he could, okay? That's kind of been the way I've been hardwired my whole life. So I didn't expect those guys to change anything for me, but food was good, the location was great. I made some good friends, good, like any association, you're closer to some people than other people. And the guys at Sigma Phi were distinguished guys. They were good students. If you looked around at who they were, Ken Dryden, the hockey player, these guys were like the best on campus at something. And I'm trying to succeed. I know I'm at a great university. I'm identifying with success as much as I was going to be black anyway. So I wanted to succeed at Cornell. So I didn't have any axe to grind. I drifted away from Sigma Phi because I got caught up as I had to. I had a good friend, Sammy Young Jr. from Tuskegee, who was shot in the head in a Greyhound station for using a whites only bathroom. So I've never been the same since then. So I couldn't sit around in the Sigma Phi house, but I didn't put that weight on the guys at Sigma Phi, you know. I just drifted away. But I've tried to not, regret things, because I've learned from every experience I've had. And they say in the hood, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you strong. So, but it was a good year there. We sang Cornell songs, and the house was nice, the food was good, and people pursued their own interests, It isn't like, and then we had our studies, we had work to do, we were students. But all of this is, it makes you who you are. And you guys with the Sigma Phi experience, with the Cornell experience, and I looked at your backgrounds, you guys are making yourselves assets to the community, both of you. And to me, that's a good reason to be at Cornell. That's a good reason to expose yourself to situations you're not comfortable in. That's a good reason to do that. And what we have to get our brothers in the white community to understand is it's time for white people to share some of the discomfort of us not being the same. We shouldn't have to always be the ones bearing the weight of the fact that we have different histories, we don't look the same, and we don't want to give those up because we live off those histories. We draw on those histories. So I would ask the white brothers, don't make it so white. Make yourself a little uncomfortable for Larry and Kwame, you know. If you're okay with them being in the house, you know, make an effort. Make yourself a little uncomfortable. They're gonna be somewhat uncomfortable. They're the only brown-skinned guy in there. A fly in the buttermilk, my grandmother used to say. But we're not weak people. We're strong people. We can handle a lot, but it shouldn't always be on us.
Yeah, and I think
it's time for this weight. I'm sorry, I'm going on too much. But
no, I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
It's time for this weight to be shared. You know, when somebody's kneeling on somebody's neck who's handcuffed, that's not a Black issue. That's a human issue. Shoot somebody 7 times in the back when you could have just tackled them or whatever you felt you needed to do. And we don't even know if he did anything wrong. That's not a Black issue. And we're sitting up here with a Constitution and a Declaration of Independence. It's ridiculous. And I gotta listen to Melania Trump talking about what she wants to see for the country. Don't have a lot of patience with it.
No, I was just gonna add on, I think in the connected world that we live in now, and this is gonna sound like a plug for LinkedIn because I work there, but it really is. Like if you're thinking about actionable ways that you can influence communities, it's never been easier to find individuals that don't look like you and offer mentorship and sponsorship and opening up your network. We actually we have a team that's studying the underconnected youth and the opportunities that they see compared to other individuals on LinkedIn. So the easiest way and why I love working there is that our mission is to connect the world to economic opportunity. And it's the first platform that can actually do that by actually creating a digital representation of different members. But what you can do if you're out of the workforce, if you feel like you're in a pandemic, you can offer your network, your access to individuals, and it's never been easier to find those individuals. I think at the company, we're thinking about easier ways to create like a marketplace to connect people who are interested in these type of opportunities to individuals that are seeking those mentorship. But I think just either whether it's on that platform, Facebook, or even individuals you meet or introduce to, I think that's the easiest way to really make change is by offering your access to your network. And then I got said I was a little bit unhopeful before, but I think just hearing your stories and kind of what the house was like when both of you were there, I think there has definitely been a very positive progression of just the belonging within Sig Phi for Black, Brown, no matter the background. When I joined the house, we had Asian Americans, we had a Puerto Rican brother, we had a biracial brother, had a Ghanaian brother. So it definitely was a melting pot, and I definitely felt welcomed. And obviously there are people I was closer to rather than others, a little like some people that weren't as friendly as others, but I think all in all, it definitely was a place of belonging and actually a place I look back upon fondly. So I think that's another reason for hope, is that some of these, like I'm in a number of these brothers' weddings and everything. So these weren't just fleeting relationships that were created while I was in the house. These were actually meaningful relationships, and some of the men I call my best friends in my life. So I got a little bit unhopeful before, but as I hear these stories, and I think that's why I was particularly interested in doing this panel, is just I think it's fascinating to hear the progression of three completely different individuals at completely different times in the house. So this is actually, hearing these stories has made me a bit more hopeful. I definitely think Sigma Phi, there were still houses on campus that you walked in, not to name names, that you were like, I'm not going to stick around for cocktails. I'm gonna keep it moving and find another house. And they made you feel that way. And Sigma Phi never, from the moment I walked in, I never had that feeling there. So just wanted to call that out, that there definitely has been progress. So.
And Dan, if I may so make a request, I'm dying to hear from others on this call, and like what they're making of what we're sharing, what's on their minds, what they're thinking, because like to Larry's point, there were conversations during my undergrad we had in Grand Central or in bedrooms or Thursday dinners with coats and ties, which was a whole new thing to me, but nonetheless, about race and about my experience and about their experience, like raw stuff, like talking about the N-word. You don't get more raw than that. And that I think only could happen in that environment. And so I am dying for us to actually pause and hear where others are, what sense you're making of all of this, and what place you see in this.
You know, with the permission of all of you, I don't want to make this a one-off. I want to schedule another. Maybe that would be the best opportunity. I think one, I know how I feel. I need to absorb a lot of what I've heard tonight. And the second is, I really feel like this conversation, and it really was a conversation, needs to continue. I want to ask the questions. We may not be able to repair the whole world or even this country, but what can we do? I think we can have an impact, certainly in Sigma Phi, and the ripples of making a change at Sigma Phi are not just Sigma Phi and not just the other fraternities at Cornell, but maybe, you know, the million students who are in fraternities across this country. And maybe the ripple effect can also be the impact we have on our university. I would like to, you know, with, again, your permission, and I'm sure I'll get it from the crowd here based on the fact nobody's left this call in the hour, let's schedule another, and let's hopefully get not only these folks back, but invite folks to listen to this conversation and join us for the next one. You know, we've got really a whole year. Maybe we can make a difference, not only in changing our attitudes and our actions, but maybe changing, you know, the community that we know we care about so deeply. Because if we can inspire, you know, 3,000 students year after year at Cornell, you know, look at where you guys have ended up, where we've all ended up because of the benefit of the education we had. I think we can have not only a profound impact on our communities, but maybe in fact on this country. I do want to, you know, wrap this up, just out of respect for the folks. You know, we've gotten a lot of comments here. There were some initial ones, you know, why did you join Sigma Phi as opposed to none altogether, or the African American House, which is on campus now, though I don't believe they have got a residence, and you touched on that. I think some of the questions are out here for everyone to see, but I guess I'd just like to ask the question is, you know, as I said at the beginning, one of the things we can do is to understand and to learn. But the next question is, what can we do? And it's not your job to tell us that. I think that's a message I'm getting loud and clear, not only from you, but also from everything else I've read. But is there a step that we should be taking? And maybe it is to continue this conversation. I don't think institutions are going to change things for us. I think it's going to be the people inside those institutions.
Yeah.
I'd just like to hear maybe
and I'm forgive me, but I'm going to push a little harder. I think we should direct that question to the audience. I'd be interested in hearing other people's perspective on that.
Take yourself off of mute, guys, if you want to add to the conversation, please? Paul.
Yeah, I was Paul Miller. I was a year behind Ruben at Sigma Phi. My story is different than probably most of the white people on this call. Bottom line is I'm not uncomfortable around Blacks. I grew up in a very upper middle class, high-end neighborhood in Los Angeles. 3 years before I was born, Nat King Cole moved into the neighborhood, had crosses burned on his front lawn. My family was very liberal. I went to public school, public high school. It was 30% Anglo, 30% Asian, primarily third generation Japanese, 40% Black. I was a fat kid, slow as hell, played junior varsity football with a bunch of Black guys who clobbered my guts out every afternoon. Got to hang out with those guys in the locker room. Became hot shit in high school, and sure I won 90% of the Black vote and was elected student body president. Went to Cornell, started in fall of 1966. Cornell had started recruiting people from the inner city in New York. And I looked at these guys, it was primarily guys, and I felt uncomfortable with all the whites around. There's how the hell can these guys exist in this kind of a situation? The sophomore, junior year economics course I was taking, there were some real issues with the professor. Black students walked after class to the economics department. I tagged along. I was the only white person in that sit-in. But I also know my place. And when the leader of the group came up to me after about an hour, hour and a half and said, you know, you really should not be here. I didn't push back. I didn't tell him my history. I walked out. And he was right. There's a time and place to do things. And, you know, Ruben, I've thought about you often over the years, and you know, the fact that you brought Stokely Carmichael to Cornell. I remember that night. I remember what he said when the most powerful thing in the world is the power of definition. And it stayed with me all of these years. And, you know, Sigma Phi was a great place for me. My class was, half the guys went to prep school. There were no Blacks in my class. The first Puerto Rican from the inner city in New York at Cornell was in my class. So we got that taste of it. And I would talk to Ruben from time to time when he came down. And so anyhow, I wanted to tell that story. The stuff that's going on in this country today is horrific. I weep about it. Thank you for listening. I'll be back for the next call.
Thanks,
Good
Paul.
to see you. Good to see you. It's been a while.
Anyone else?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Who is
My
this?
name is Johnny, or John Horning, I-75, Alpha of California. And I want to thank you guys tremendously for putting this on. I just received this notification today that it was happening, and I changed plans immediately. It's great to see brothers of color. It's great to see all brothers. But to hear you guys talking from your heart, and yeah, it hurts me really too. And like the gentleman who just talked before me, Paul, I've spent a lot of my time in the Black community. I actually left Berkeley after my second year to hitchhike through Africa. And I went there to see the animals in Kilimanjaro, and I ended up staying for a year and a half, fell in love with African people. And then when I came back, I got involved politically around the Bay Area and eventually joined a choir called the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir, which you may have heard of. It was a multiracial choir that sang songs of, love and harmony and peace. And we'd always tell the audience, wherever, you hear Jesus or God, just insert your God, or your God is there, so you can sing along with us. And we actually sang at some big festivals, including the New Orleans Jazz Festival. We won a Grammy with Linda Ronstadt. But the most moving parts of that was one Sunday every month, we'd go into the inner city churches, whether it was the Love Center in Oakland, some of the big gospel churches in the Black communities in Oakland, San Francisco, and around the Bay Area. And as those of you who are churchgoers in the gospel community know, there's a lot of private personal testimony that goes on. And I remember seeing a little black girl take the microphone and open her mouth and just rip the most beautiful music. But then she told stories that her older brother had been shot. And her middle brother is in jail for what was supposed to be a drug bust, which, there was no drugs involved. And so I witnessed those stories for years and years and years. And when I try to talk to we have a progressive community out here, in my generation. As progressive as white people think they are, they can't deeply understand what it feels like you talk about every day, to go out your door and worry if you're going to get shot for a traffic ticket, or if your kid's going to get shot for a traffic ticket. I do think what's happening now, there is a super heightened awareness. I think that Ferguson, I think that that George, and then, God forbid, God bless that man who just got hit up in Wisconsin. These things are like, people are going, wow, I knew it was bad, but wow. However, what we've seen, and I think that there is the hope. We talked about the hope. Larry, what you talked about, how things have gotten, going to school at Cornell now is different than when Rubin's time and Kwame's. And that was Obama. And what we're seeing now is the big pushback. We have made a lot of progress, but you have to be aware that whenever you make progress, for every action, there's a counteraction. And I think that's what's going on now. We got to hold our faith and find some way to continue through this counteraction. I hope it will die out in a shameful way. And then we'll pick back up the progress where we left it off with the election of Obama, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my hope. But I can't thank you guys enough for sharing with us your personal stories. I really appreciate it.
Share as well, Dan.
Thanks, John. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ruben, Kwame, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I don't know you, but I do know Larry, who I overlapped with briefly at Cornell. I'm CO6. And I think I see a lot now about race, and particularly Black-white race relations in America, that I didn't see then. And as you all were sharing your stories, I wrote down a few notes on some of the observations I've had over the last decade as a white man who grew up upper middle class and then attended Cornell. And so I'm just going to briefly share those. You said you wanted people to share the white perspective, and Dan, you wanted to hear about what we can do at Sigma Phi. And I think it's interesting, what we can do at Sigma Phi is exactly the same thing we can do in the Cornell community as a whole and in the country as a whole. And so I want to sort of rip the Band-Aid off from the white perspective. The first thing is this idea that I really chafed at when I first heard it, which is the burden to educate is not on the oppressed. And that idea came out in a lot of your responses. I remember thinking, well, gosh, I'm putting work in. Why are people upset that I'm asking them questions as Black men and Black women? And it's this idea that there's already a great burden on you if you're oppressed. And I think, to my fellow white brothers from Sigma Phi and from the broader community, recognizing that is an important thing to do. And that leads to my second point, which is this idea that racism is very much like an iceberg. You can see it, but there's so much of it that you can't see when you're in a position of privilege. You don't recognize that comments you make are offensive or are microaggressions just because people aren't, like, you know that lynching someone in a yard is wrong, but there's so much that you do and see that you can't observe because it hasn't been part of your experience. And so trying to recognize that is really important. The third thing is this idea of white culture is the norm. White culture is the baseline in America. The Declaration of Independence and Constitution were written by primarily white immigrants from the United Kingdom. And there's a wonderful David Foster Wallace essay where he reviews a dictionary, but it's called Authority in American Usage. And he introduces this term of spoken white English, SWE, as the grammatical and syntactical norm that certainly we all experienced in education, but for a lot of us, it was the norm. And so this idea that white culture is the regular, or perhaps is in some ways superior or pure, is something that's really hard to challenge when you've grown up in a country that was built with white culture at the center of it. The fourth thing I noticed is doing the right thing. I think for a lot of us as white people, we feel guilty over the racial injustice that we see. And sometimes we do things to make that pain and that guilt go away. And so when you do the right thing in a racial context, you're not going necessarily to feel better. And sometimes it's going to feel like you don't get thanks from the Black community for, say, showing up at a Black Lives Matter rally. And that's because it's like saying, hey, thanks for treating me as an equal, or thanks for saying my life matters. That's like such a basic human decency thing to do, that you're going to recognize that just showing up and acknowledging people, it's going to feel like it doesn't earn you a pat on the back. And what you need to do is look at yourself and say, am I doing this for me and for my feelings of guilt, or am I doing this for other people so that it's right? And then the last thing I wanted to say, and this is, I think, really hard for a lot of us to accept, like, I believe I'm a good person and a kind person and a caring person. But I'm going to say one thing after this, sorry. But so to look at yourself and recognize that all of this is an idea that Ruben and Kwame and Larry shared, that everyone harbors racial prejudice. It's conditioned into us. If you start thinking of if there's any piece of me that is racist or racially prejudiced, you entirely reject the idea that you could be racist and you're unwilling to engage with it. There's also a piece of you, you're not totally ignorant, but there are things that you are ignorant of. And so being willing to accept that means you can learn them. And then lastly, and credit to Trevor Noah for saying this very publicly recently, but you will do things wrong. You're gonna mess up. And you can't not engage, you can't not ask questions, you can't not be willing to offend your Black friends by asking to talk to them about these things. You're going to screw up, and you need to be willing to take that risk. And it's very different from the risk that Blacks have to take every day, because you can't take your skin off when you're white or when you're Black. The last thing I wanted to say is I recognize this sometimes when hearing Black people speak about the issues that they face in America. Some terms today that I had an initial averse reaction to were describing things as heading toward a genocide. I remember hearing it the first time when people talked about a prison pipeline, and I was like, that's crazy. And I'm not going to, I happen to have come around on some of those ideas, but the point I want to make is, unless there's a massive Black American conspiracy to trick you about these issues, why are you hearing them left, center, right, over and over, years and years and years? And so what I say to you is, when you look around and you find yourself listening to a Black voice and you say, that sounds a little off, that sounds a little dramatic, if you don't think that there's a giant Black conspiracy to propagate these stories, put your own resistance aside and at least listen and entertain the idea, because it's probably not coming from nowhere. And so these, I think, are important things for us to do at Sigma Phi and encourage the actives to do. But they're the exact same things that I think will make big steps on a Cornell-wide level and a national level to really make strides on this front.
Thank you, Adam.
I'd like to say a couple words.
Thanks, Peter.
First of all, Adam, you just blew me away. So eloquent, so well thought out. So much of I think what is going on here this evening, you were able to synthesize in a way that that really has just touched me right now. I'm from a generation and a place in Baltimore that sees a lot of racism. My father was very racist. Most of my brothers and sisters are racist. I had dinner the other night with a person that I've known for almost all my life, and after dinner they had been reading books on being anti-racist, and they said, you know, I think I'm a racist. And they said, you know, I thought of XYZ the other day, and I realized suddenly that I am a racist. I try to call it out when I can. And I think one of the things that Adam said that was mirroring Ruben, I guess it was, that we do, there is a kernel of racism in everything, in everybody. I mean, it is sort of almost like a biological fact that people are different, and it's you have to accept difference. You have to enjoy diversity. You have to encourage diversity, but diversity, by definition, means that people are different. But the question is how we deal with that. I have a story. Let me tell you a quick story. I was a diplomat for 36 years, representing our country overseas. I was running the consular section in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, in 1991. And a new officer came out. His first assignment, his name was Tuli Nabo Mushingi. And Tuli had grown up in the Eastern Congo, in what was then Zaire. He got his first pair of shoes when he was 13 years old. He was an African child that lived in a mud hut, used to walk miles and miles to school, but a very, very smart guy. He managed to get a job at the Peace Corps training in Bukavu, Zaire, fell in love with one of the staff, married her, ended up getting a PhD in linguistics at Dartmouth, took the Foreign Service exam a couple of years, like 2 years after he became a US citizen, and became one of my vice consuls. My initial reaction to him was, how can this guy represent America? I mean, he grew up in Africa, and what does he know about America? And it took about 30 seconds, and then all of a sudden the light came on, and I said, this is what makes our country great, is that we can accept somebody like Tuli Nabo Mushingi and put him into a position of responsibility. Tuli Nabo Mushingi right now is a US ambassador. He's gotten to the very top of the diplomatic corps, and he is representing our country fabulously. Just a really, really remarkable guy. But that gives me hope. And the fact that though my generation has a bigger problem than most, when I see my children and their friends and that generation, as Adam said, out in the streets, it does give me great hope that that we have a positive future. It looks dark right now, but again, not to get into the politics, but if we can get a caring and thoughtful government in place, we can start down this long, long road that we have to go. Anyway, thank you guys all. Really wonderful evening, and appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, Larry.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that I'm in Southern California, so this call started for me at 5 o'clock tonight, and I only just became aware that the NBA, baseball, everybody went on strike tonight to protest Kenosha, which I think is absolutely amazing, because so many people are going to realize what they didn't play, and I think it's going to strike a lot of people as off. Certainly most of the Republican convention tonight, I wonder if they're going to comment at all. Because I feel like I watched that convention and I see people just ignoring the truth or spinning the truth. To see Don Jr. say that, we have to become a less racist country is mind-numbing. But beyond that, and politics aside, I was at Sigma Phi in the early to mid 80s. 82 to 86 was the time I was at Cornell. And if I can say that felt like a very white time to me, I don't think it's an understatement. That was the Reagan 80s. And I grew up in New York City. I lived in Los Angeles for the last 30 years. And that just felt like a time of absolutely whitewashing everything. And today, besides just being sick over so much of what I see in the news, there's the side of it you can't make change without turning it over. And maybe everything we see today is a harbinger of good things to come or better things to come. I've never thought of myself as anything but, even if the word didn't exist, woke. But you want to feel less woke? Have two teenagers. I've got a 22-year-old and I've got a 15-year-old who think I'm out of touch. And I say to them, maybe. I listen. I try to listen more than talk, and say, you can say that your old man is out there on his own, but that's not the case. And when my 15-year-old said, "Can I go?" She's in 10th grade now. Can I go to a Black Lives Matter protest in Hollywood? And I said, absolutely, you can. Who are you going with? And she named the friends that I know she has. And I said, do you think it's something to be concerned about COVID? And she said, well, I'll be careful. And bless her, she was careful. But she brought it to me. And I don't know that I would have thought prior to that, oh, my kids should go. But I certainly was all for it. And, I feel like maybe I'm one of the older guys on the call. Maybe not. I don't know. But at 56, I don't know that I'm going to be out there picketing in the streets. Not anymore. But that doesn't mean that I can't use my voice to talk to my friends, to speak out whenever I hear microaggressions, and I hear them all the time. It's crazy, the things, if you're attuned to it, you hear. But I cannot be silent, and I think that's maybe the only thing that I can do. That's might make a difference. And I work. I live in Los Angeles, but I work in Orange County, which loves Trump, and can't wait to just reelect him. And I pick my battles. I don't always get into it with people because it's not healthy. But a lot of people I work with would maybe not call themselves racist, but I would. And again, you can't always be the voice you want to be, but in a pick and choose manner, I do the best I can to say, you're not really looking at that the right way. And I applaud the three guys at the top of my screen, Kwame, Larry, and Ruben, for speaking tonight. And I look forward to next call and sharing even more, because I have definitely been a beneficiary of white privilege, even if I didn't know it, even if I didn't experience it that way. There's no question I have. And that feels today as something that, okay, I can talk about that. I can say what that did or didn't mean to me at the time and what it means to me now. I thank you all for being here. And Dan, thanks for putting this on. This is really quite good. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. You know, I was kidding about going on for 4 hours, but I'm afraid we might actually be able to do that tonight. But I'm going to ask actually our three guests if they wouldn't just share some closing remarks, maybe partly based on what you heard in response to your own comments tonight. I promise we'll put something together very soon as a follow-up. I do want to add really that just two quick thoughts on the Cornell network and how we might be able to benefit. As some of you may know, J.C. Tretter, who plays center for the Cleveland Browns, is class of 13 out of Cornell University, and he was recently elected as president of the NFL Players Association. So maybe we can take advantage of that connection to see if we have even a broader influence than we thought of. And I guess some of you also know that Larry Tannenbaum, who is not only a Cornellian, but a Sigma Phi who graduated in '68, is not only a majority owner, I believe, of the Raptors, but was unanimously elected as chairman of the NBA Board of Governors. So we can imagine what his conversations are about tonight. So I hope we're able to reach out to that community as well through this remarkable Cornell University network. So maybe we'll go back in reverse order here. Larry, Kwame, Ruben, any closing thoughts?
Put me on the spot. I have to gather my thoughts pretty quickly.
You can pass on.
No, I'll go. I appreciate everyone that's joined this call. I think it's just amazing to see the attendance and just the number of individuals that want to start having these conversations. So again, I'm leaving truly. I'm not just saying this as lip service. I am leaving this call more hopeful for the future and just here. I think it's great that we actually heard from everyone, just how thoughtful all of you have been and just hearing your support. So I'm truly, this was good for my soul to hear all of this. This was therapeutic for me. So I thank you all. I look forward to the next session. And I think to Larry's point about feeling like they're not doing enough, I think similar to like racists obviously have members of the Ku Klux Klan, but those aren't the only racists out in society, or the ways that systemic racism is able to persist today. There's judges, there's the police force. So just as yourself, like you don't need to be on the front line to be affecting change. You don't need to feel insecure that you're not doing enough if you're not there at a protest. There's tons of stuff you can do behind the scenes in the corporate world, in your social life, in your interaction, just day to day. So I think one of the positive mantras I've been telling myself is like 1% better every day. So just doing little things that can potentially impact the world. I think that's great. And I don't think anyone should feel bad for not being out there processing, but make sure you're doing something and maybe being a mentor for someone. But those are all amazing ways that you can create opportunities that'll ripple through that person's life and their future children and everything. So those are just kind of my closing thoughts.
Thanks, Larry. Kwame?
I'll aim to be brief. Thank you all so much for showing up, and for those of you that got to share, thank you for sharing. I know others probably wanted to share and we ran out of time, so I'm glad we'll run this back. A couple quick thoughts. One is do whatever you can to not numb yourself to what's going on. This is a daily thing I'm working on, because after a while, it just becomes so much and you can numb yourself. But the moment I think we get numb, the moment racism wins. And as I watch all the different faces, and I've been clicking between the screens, like, this is a formidable group to put against racism. And I think this call is a way to support that, and it's a way to not get numb. While it is painful, that pain is important. That's my first thought. And then my second thought is I look forward to the next conversation. Dan, right here now, I commit, I'm in, I'll be there. And I have my wife I have something my wife says to me often in my head, which is, just be careful. Because real talk, because I'm a black man, you can't really see it. I have long dreadlocks. We know that tomorrow isn't promised, and it's less promised for me than it is for a lot of folks on this call. If I go out and I'm somewhere where I'm black while fill in the blank, walking, jogging, breaking up a fight. And so that's, my wife is fearful every day whenever I go out and do things. That's a burden for her. It's a burden for me. And at the same time, what I ask is that everyone left on this call at this point choose something, anything, literally anything. Make a choice, a declaration to yourself before you click the leave button on the bottom right-hand corner of Zoom to do something. It could be you're going to read an article. You're going to read a book. You're going to follow up with someone that was on this call that said something and have an additional conversation. You're going to go protest. You're going to, whatever it is, just commit to doing at least one thing before we meet up for the next call. And God willing, I'll see you all there.
Thank you, Kwame. Ruben.
Well, I fear I may have talked too much already, but I enjoyed participating and hearing from everyone. And I have a particular place in my heart for Cornell people. I know what it takes to be a Cornell grad and living in Detroit for more than 40 years. I know what a great education means and how few people in this country get the opportunity to get the education that we got, the difference that it makes in your life. So I don't feel I'm on here just talking to anyone just to be talking. I'm talking to some of the most privileged people that I have the opportunity to talk to. And I think Cornell grads are powerful. We have an illiteracy rate here in Detroit that's close to 50%. And so sitting around campus, splitting hairs over elitist notions. I mean, we've got people who are overcharged and get one felony and they're basically out of the work world. Kids dropping out of high school. So we talk about the obstacles of white racism, but a lot of people are broken. A lot of people are destroyed, and it's not an easy answer how we recover or even help folks cope, especially when we sit up here and talk about how tough it is for us to cope. But as long as I'm taking breath because of what I've been taught about what my ancestors went through, I'll be trying to move the ball forward as long as there's breath in my body. And for those who are willing to help, I appreciate it, and I hope to do my part. Honor to meet you guys and be on the panel with you. And if you're ever in Detroit, stop by and see me.
Thank you, Ruben, Kwame, Larry, all of our audience tonight. And wow, what a great evening we've had. And thought that crosses my mind is I'm proud to call you my brother, and hope that I earn the privilege of being able to call you my brother. So with that, let me say thank you. Would love to hear from everyone. I believe you have my email about your thoughts about the evening, any suggestions. I will post shortly the recording of this evening. I would appreciate it if you'd share that with both the Sigma Phi Cornell community, Sigma Phi and Cornell community, and anyone else who you think may benefit from hearing what remarkable thoughts were shared tonight. So God bless, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good
Bye,
night.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
You bet.